the other thing that gets me is the timid becoming more timid, because Americans are a timid people at this point. I mean, we have our military, and they're gutsy people usually, but if you're not in the military and you're a man, I mean, I'm one of them. Timid, timid. So that's something to really be aware of too. But I think I don't know that necessarily helps us understand how Magdeburg is going to. Oh, let me say that differently. Does Magdeburg help us address those problems?
Magdeburg is going to try to retrain your loyalty to God's word, because that's exactly the thing that's under assault when you are being tempted by the idea that if you just betray the truth and those who hold to it, you will somehow wind up with something better, right? So the point of making religious confessions, then or now or anytime, is not what we like to think of as virtue signaling now. Because a virtue signal does not actually concern the conscience. Virtue signaling concerns honor and shame.
Mm-hmm.
And I receive greater honor if I virtue signal within whatever group for whatever reason.
Shunning. It's a shunning tactic. Right. It's
right.
Puritanism. They are the Puritans. The Puritans won. They just changed sides. I'm not kidding.
And I receive shame if I don't put out the signal, or if if I'm too quiet during the training at work, whatever. A religious confession is not a virtue signal because it concerns conscience, and conscience it exists whether or not anyone recognizes it, whether or not the state recognizes it, or my employer recognizes it, or whoever. Right? If you get banned from YouTube for saying what you're saying, you still have a conscience, and God sees it. Right? Mm-hmm. So go back to the Sermon on the Mount. Understand the difference between the Pharisees behave within an honor-shame dynamic. Jesus wants you to behave within a conscience dynamic, which means that you do what you should even when no one sees, because your Father who is in heaven sees in secret. And conscience has to confess before men, and that's what a confession does. Augsburg, Magdeburg, whatever, the brief statement, it has to confess before men certain things that are controversial in that time. And that's when you have to say, this is what I will say. I will also speak of your testimonies before kings and shall not be put to shame. How will I not be put to shame? It's because my conscience regards and fears only finally God. And that is why my conscience is bound to God's word. And that's why I must state what God's word says on this topic or that topic. And that's what a confession does.